The moment I saw 3 police cars surrounding my disabled brother while he fished from his wheelchair, I knew the Willowbrook HOA had just made the most expensive mistake in their pathetic lives. Picture this. It's dawn, dead quiet except for birds chirping. The smell of morning dew on pine needles fills the air. Then suddenly, the aggressive rumble of diesel engines and gravel exploding under tires as 3 patrol cars race toward our private family lake like my brother Garrett is some kind of armed terrorist. But he's just sitting there in his wheelchair, fishing rod in hand, probably wondering what the hell is happening. This is a guy who lost both legs fighting for our freedom in Afghanistan, and now he's being treated like a criminal for catching bass on his own damn property. Here's what that psycho HOA president didn't know. Her little power trip was about to cost her $4 million and land her in federal prison. What would you do if you saw your family member treated like this? Let me know below. Where are you watching from? I bet half of you have your own HOA horror stories. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. My name's Damon Reeves, and this whole nightmare started because some wannabe dictator couldn't stand the sight of happiness. See, my brother Garrett and I inherited this beautiful 12-acre lakefront property from our grandfather outside the Willowbrook subdivision. The old man hand-dug that 3-acre lake back in the 60s with nothing but a backhoe and pure stubbornness. Fed by natural springs, stocked with bass and trout, it was his pride and joy. When Garrett came back from Afghanistan missing both legs, that lake became his sanctuary. The gentle hum of his motorized wheelchair rolling across the wooden dock, the soft plop of his line hitting the water, these sounds replaced the nightmares for a while. Fishing wasn't just a hobby for him, it was therapy. Enter Victoria Ashworth. Picture a woman who irons her jeans and carries an iPad like it's Excalibur. She moved to our area about 10 years ago, immediately got herself elected HOA president, and decided she was going to improve our little corner of paradise whether we wanted it or not. The first time I met Victoria, she clip-clopped across my property line in her designer heels, dragging some poor surveyor behind her. The smell of her overpowering perfume hit me before she even opened her mouth. "Mr. Reeves," she said in that fake sweet voice that makes your skin crawl, "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding about your lake." I'm standing there in work boots and coveralls. I run a precision machining business, so I'm not exactly intimidating. And this woman in her pressed blazer is telling me my family's lake somehow belongs to the HOA. "This body of water," she continued, tapping her iPad like she's reading scripture, "partially extends into our commons area. The Homeowners Association will need you to cease all unauthorized recreational activities immediately." I pulled out my grandfather's original property deed from 1962. Clear as day, every square inch of that lake sits on Reeves family land. Hell, Grandpa dug it himself before half these houses were even built. Victoria barely glanced at the documents. "These could be forged," she said with a little shrug. "We'll need our attorney to verify authenticity." That's when I knew we were dealing with a special kind of crazy. But here's the thing about bullies. They don't stop with one victim. Over the next few months, Victoria launched what I can only call a harassment campaign. She organized HOA patrols that coincidentally always seemed to drive past our property right when Garrett was fishing. She filed noise complaints about his wheelchair motor. Can you believe that? A disabled veteran's medical equipment was apparently disturbing the peace. The HOA newsletter started featuring anonymous complaints about unsightly fishing equipment and inappropriate use of waterfront areas. Garrett, who'd already sacrificed so much for his country, began to withdraw. Some days I'd find him just sitting by the window staring at his unused fishing gear. What really got to me was how Victoria poisoned the well with our neighbors. She'd corner people at the mailbox, whispering about how I was hostile and refused to cooperate with community standards. Most folks in Willowbrook are decent people, but they only heard Victoria's side of the story. The woman was systematic, I'll give her that. Every week brought a new complaint, a new threat, a new demand. She weaponized every bureaucratic tool she could find, turning simple neighborly life into a legal minefield. But Victoria made one crucial mistake. She assumed we'd just roll over and take it. She looked at Garrett in his wheelchair and saw weakness. She looked at me in my work clothes and saw someone who couldn't fight back. She had no idea that this disabled veteran sitting peacefully by our family lake was about to become the key to exposing the biggest fraud scheme our county had ever seen. Victoria's first real attack came disguised as civic duty, because nothing says good neighbor like weaponizing government bureaucracy against a disabled veteran. I'm in my shop rebuilding a transmission when this white county truck rumbles up my driveway. Out steps Jim Patterson, county inspector, looking like he'd rather be getting a root canal. The poor bastard's carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of a man sent to investigate Bigfoot sightings. "Mr. Reeves, I've got reports you're running an unlicensed commercial fishing operation." I literally spit out my coffee. "Commercial fishing? Jim, my lake's 3 acres. I'd have better luck running a shrimp boat in a bathtub." But bureaucracy doesn't care about logic. Some concerned citizen, and we all know who, had filed official complaints claiming I was charging neighbors for fishing access and selling bass under the table like some kind of freshwater drug dealer. Here's where Victoria's Harvard-educated real estate brain met my grandfather's 8th grade education. And guess who won? I led Jim to the house and cracked open Grandpa's ancient tackle box. The leather hinges groaned like old bones as I pulled out 40 years of fishing logs. Every single fish caught, dated, weighed, and recorded in pencil that had faded to the color of weak tea. "Sweet Jesus," Jim muttered, flipping through decades of meticulous documentation. "This is more thorough than most commercial operations. Your grandfather was serious about record keeping." "Grandpa always said documentation beats accusations every time," I told him, remembering the old man's advice about dealing with government types. "Paper trails don't lie, but people sure as hell do." Jim's eyebrows shot up. "You didn't hear this from me, but we've gotten similar complaints about 3 other properties this year. All dismissed, all from the same source." That night, my phone rang off the hook. First was Eleanor Hutchins, 73, whose crime against humanity was growing tomatoes that apparently attracted rodents. "Honey, that woman tried the same garbage with me, said my vegetable garden was a health hazard because it wasn't aesthetically consistent with neighborhood standards." Then Dave Martinez called. His sin? Parking an RV in his own driveway. Victoria had reported him for operating a mobile home park on residential property. "She told the city I was renting it out to transients," Dave said, his voice tight with anger. "I use it for camping trips with my kids twice a year." The Kowalski family's story was even worse. Their backyard chickens, 3 hens that provided eggs for their elderly parents, were suddenly a commercial poultry operation and unsanitary health hazard. As I listened to story after story, the smell of corruption got stronger than the diesel fumes from county trucks. My dad used to say that when multiple people tell you it's raining, you better grab an umbrella, even if you can't see the clouds yet. But it was Garrett who connected the dots. My brother wheeled up to our kitchen table where I'd spread out all the harassment documentation like a war room briefing. "She's not just power hungry," he said, his scarred hands moving across the papers with surgical precision. "Look at the properties." Holy shit, he was right. Every targeted property sat on prime real estate. Lakefront lots, corner properties with mature oak trees, large parcels perfect for subdivision. All owned by people who didn't fit Victoria's country club vision. Elderly folks, veterans, immigrants, anyone who couldn't afford to fight back. "She's playing a long game," Garrett continued, drawing on his military intelligence training. "Force out the undesirables, help the right buyers move in, collect real estate commissions on both ends. Classic gentrification disguised as community improvement." That's when Victoria dropped her next bomb. A certified letter arrived with the kind of legal letterhead that costs more per page than most people make in an hour. The envelope practically reeked of billable hours and entitled attorneys. The letter accused me of ongoing violations of community standards, failure to cooperate with reasonable requests, and, my personal favorite, activities detrimental to neighborhood harmony. It threatened to involve appropriate state and federal authorities if I didn't immediately cease all disruptive behaviors. Translation: stop being poor and disabled where rich people can see you. "She's made a critical tactical error," Garrett said that evening as we watched sunset turn our lake into liquid gold. "She's opened multiple fronts without intelligence on her targets." Meaning what exactly? Meaning she just declared war on a bunch of veterans and old-timers who've been dealing with bullies longer than she's been alive. In the Army, we had a saying, never pick fights you can't finish, because someone else will finish them for you. The next morning, Victoria Ashworth would learn that harassing disabled veterans isn't just morally bankrupt, it's strategically stupid. Because veterans don't just fight back, they coordinate, they plan, and they absolutely demolish their enemies. Victoria's next move proved she'd graduated from petty harassment to full-blown environmental terrorism. Because nothing says good neighbor like trying to frame a disabled veteran for poisoning the water supply. I'm sipping coffee and watching Garrett work his magic with a spinnerbait when my phone explodes with texts. Dave Martinez, health department at your place, hazmat suits. Eleanor, honey, there's government trucks everywhere. Here comes Dr. Sarah Wilson, county health inspector, dressed like she's investigating a nuclear meltdown instead of a fishing pond. The smell of rubber gloves and industrial disinfectant fills the morning air as she unpacks enough testing equipment to analyze the Mars rover's bathwater. Mr. Reeves, we've received serious allegations about bacterial contamination from your recreational fishing activities. Serious allegations. From who exactly? The two neighbors who support us, or the one psychopath who's been stalking us for months? Dr. Wilson explains that someone filed detailed reports claiming our fishing was creating dangerous bacterial runoff, threatening the subdivision's groundwater. Apparently, according to Victoria's fevered imagination, fish guts and earthworms were transforming our pristine lake into biological warfare. Ma'am, this lake's been here since Kennedy was president. If it was killing people, we'd have noticed by now. But government bureaucracy runs on paperwork, not common sense. While Dr. Wilson collected samples like she was hunting for the Ebola virus, Victoria's white Range Rover cruised past for the fourth time that morning. The woman wasn't even pretending to be subtle anymore. She was marking territory like a rabid dog. That's when I decided to channel my grandfather's philosophy. When someone accuses you of something, prove them wrong so thoroughly they choke on their own lies. I hired Aquatech Environmental, the same company that tests water for fancy resorts. Cost me $3,000 I didn't have, but Grandpa always said the best revenge is being right when everyone expects you to be wrong. Garrett found them online while researching water quality standards. If we're doing this, we're doing it right, he said, his military precision kicking in. No half measures, no room for doubt. 2 days later, their report arrived, and I laughed so hard I nearly fell into the lake. Our water was cleaner than what comes out of most people's kitchen taps. Perfect pH balance, bacterial levels so low they were practically non-existent, dissolved oxygen content that would make a trout farm jealous. The report concluded our natural spring system was actually purifying groundwater for the entire area. But here's where Victoria's genius plan exploded in her face like a defective firework. Dr. Wilson's official county testing revealed that while we were running a natural water treatment plant, the HOA's retention pond was basically a toxic waste dump. High concentrations of lawn fertilizer runoff, enough chemical treatments to sterilize a hospital, and chlorine levels that could bleach your eyebrows from 50 feet away. Victoria had spent weeks accusing us of environmental crimes while her precious subdivision was poisoning half the county. The irony was thicker than the chemical sludge coating their pond bottom. Mr. Reeves, Dr. Wilson called to apologize, your lake is actually an environmental asset. It's filtering contaminants from upstream sources and improving water quality downstream. Meanwhile, the health department launched a full investigation into the HOA's water management practices. Victoria had tried to frame us for poisoning the neighborhood while her own people were running a Superfund site disguised as a community amenity. But Garrett wasn't celebrating yet. While I was doing victory laps around the lake, he was deep in legal research databases, following digital breadcrumbs like a bloodhound with a law degree. Damon, you need to see this, he said, wheeling over with his laptop screen glowing. Victoria's real estate license has been suspended twice. The records read like a serial killer's resume. Colorado, 2018. Harassment campaign against elderly homeowners. Arizona, 2020. Fraudulent complaints to force property sales. Same playbook every time. Target vulnerable residents, weaponize bureaucracy, collect commissions from the chaos. She's not just crazy, Garrett continued, scrolling through complaint after complaint. She's a professional community destroyer. This is her business model. Victoria moved every few years, leaving behind neighborhoods torn apart by litigation and neighbor warfare. She was like a locust swarm in designer clothes, consuming communities and moving on to fresh victims. The health department revelation had awakened our neighbors from Victoria's spell. Social media exploded with people sharing their Victoria horror stories, comparing notes on her manipulation tactics. The woman who'd spent months isolating us was suddenly the one standing alone. Eleanor brought cookies and tears. We should have spoken up sooner. That woman had us terrified of lawsuits and special assessments. Dave organized a lake barbecue where kids learned to fish while adults shared Victoria survival stories. For the first time in months, Garrett's laugh echoed across the water. Victoria's response was pure desperation wrapped in fake authority. Emergency HOA meeting to address malicious disinformation campaigns against legitimate community oversight. But her mask was slipping. Those pressed blazers looked wrinkled now. The fake smile had curdled into permanent sneers, and that Range Rover was practically wearing grooves in our road from constant surveillance. "Cornered animals make stupid mistakes," Garrett observed as she drove by again. He had no idea how prophetic those words would be. Victoria's final act before her world collapsed was so spectacularly stupid, so obviously criminal, that it made me wonder if she'd suffered some kind of psychotic break. Or maybe she'd just been sniffing too many fumes from that toxic HOA pond. It was dawn on a Tuesday, that magical hour when the lake turns silver and the only sounds are birds singing and the gentle hum of Garrett's wheelchair motor heading to his favorite fishing spot. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with morning dew on pine needles. Pure peace. Then 3 patrol cars came screaming up our driveway like we were harboring bin Laden. I bolted outside in my underwear and work boots to find 3 confused cops surrounding my brother, who was sitting in his wheelchair with a fishing rod, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. "Sir, we received reports of trespassing and intimidation of residents," said Officer Martinez, no relation to our neighbor Dave. "Are you Garrett Reeves?" "That's me," Garrett replied with the kind of calm that comes from facing roadside bombs. "But I'm fishing on my own property, so I'm not sure what the problem is." The lead officer, a decent guy named Thompson, was clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, we got a call from Victoria Ashworth claiming you were on HOA property intimidating homeowners." I pulled out our property survey while explaining that our lake sits entirely on family land. The cop studied the documents, looked at Garrett sitting peacefully with his fishing rod, then looked at each other with expressions that said, "What the hell are we doing here?" "Mr. Reeves, you're obviously not trespassing," Officer Thompson said, "but we have to file a report since a complaint was made." That's when I made a decision that would change everything. "Officers, I want to file a counter-complaint for filing a false police report." Body cameras captured every word as I explained Victoria's months-long harassment campaign. The health department fiasco, the fishing license scam, the systematic targeting of vulnerable neighbors. Thompson's expression shifted from confusion to anger as he realized they'd been used as weapons in Victoria's private war. "We'll be having a conversation with Ms. Ashworth about appropriate use of emergency services," Thompson said, his jaw tight with professional irritation. But that afternoon brought a revelation that made Victoria's police stunt look like amateur hour. Eleanor Hutchins knocked on our door carrying a manila envelope thick enough to choke a horse. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steel. "Boys, I've been keeping records. Victoria thinks she's been clever, but she made one mistake. She assumed old people don't pay attention." Inside that envelope was 8 years of documented corruption that would make a mafia accountant blush. Victoria's husband, Richard Ashworth, had been secretly hired as the HOA's management consultant through a shell company called Willowbrook Administrative Services, $50,000 annually for administrative oversight that nobody had voted to approve. Eleanor had copies of the original HOA charter from 1985, which explicitly prohibited board members from financial conflicts of interest. She had bank statements showing payments to 3 different LLCs, all owned by Richard. Landscape consulting, security monitoring, legal coordination, a shell game designed to funnel HOA funds into the Ashworth family bank accounts. "I've been documenting this for 3 years, Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength. "That woman threatened me with special assessments every time I asked questions about the budget." Garrett's military mind went into overdrive, connecting financial dots like a Pentagon briefing. "Eleanor, this isn't just embezzlement, this is organized fraud. They've stolen approximately $180,000 annually for 8 years. The math was staggering. $1.4 million, stolen from neighbors who trusted Victoria to manage their community funds. But the fraud went deeper. Eleanor had photographs of storm damage repairs that Richard's company had supposedly completed. Pool renovations for a pool that didn't exist. Tennis court resurfacing for courts that were never built. Clubhouse repairs to a building that turned out to be Victoria's garage. "She's been filing insurance claims for imaginary amenities," Eleanor explained. "The insurance companies paid out based on Richard's forged invoices, then the money disappeared into their personal accounts." My hands were actually shaking as I flipped through evidence of what amounted to a criminal empire disguised as suburban governance. Victoria hadn't just been harassing us to hide her control issues, she'd been trying to eliminate witnesses to massive financial crimes. Every neighbor she's driven away was someone who might notice the missing amenities, Garrett said, his intelligence training kicking in. Force out the observant people, keep the compliant ones, steal everything that isn't nailed down. That evening, I called our attorney with evidence of federal crimes worth millions of dollars. Wire fraud, mail fraud, insurance fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. Victoria and Richard had built a criminal enterprise that would make Bernie Madoff proud. Mr. Reeves, my lawyer said after reviewing Eleanor's documentation, this is RICO territory. We're talking potential criminal forfeiture of all assets, treble damages in civil court, and serious prison time. Victoria had escalated from petty harassment to calling police on disabled veterans while sitting on evidence that could destroy her completely. The woman wasn't just evil, she was catastrophically stupid. The next morning, she would discover that some mistakes cost $4 million and a federal prison sentence. The anonymous tip that cracked Victoria's empire wide open came in the most old-school way possible. A handwritten note slipped under my door at 3 a.m. like something out of a Cold War spy novel. Check the insurance claims. She's been stealing for years. A friend who cares. No signature, no return address, just block letters written by someone who clearly knew where the bodies were buried. The paper smelled faintly of cigarettes and desperation. Garrett and I spent the next day diving into public records like digital archaeologists. What we found made Eleanor's evidence look like pocket change compared to the real heist. Victoria had filed $2.3 million in fraudulent insurance claims over 5 years. Storm damage to amenities that never existed. Vandalism repairs to facilities that were figments of her imagination. Fire damage to a community center that turned out to be a storage shed behind her house. Look at this claim, Garrett said, pointing at his laptop screen. $40,000 for flood damage restoration to the community tennis courts. I walked outside and looked around our neighborhood. What tennis courts? Exactly. Richard's company, Willowbrook Administrative Services, had submitted detailed invoices for repairs that never happened. Photos of damaged facilities that were actually pictures of Victoria's own property, digitally manipulated to look like community assets. The insurance companies had paid out based on forged receipts and doctored documentation. But here's where the fraud got really creative. Victoria had claimed her personal landscaping projects as community storm damage repair. Her new patio became sidewalk replacement after vandalism. Her pool renovation was billed as community water feature restoration. The insurance fraud investigator I contacted confirmed what we suspected. The photos submitted with claims had been photoshopped. Digital forensics could prove the images were manipulated, making this a federal wire fraud case with 20-year prison sentences. My grandfather used to say that thieves always get greedy, and greed always makes them sloppy. Victoria had gotten so comfortable stealing that she'd stopped being careful about covering her tracks. Eleanor arrived that afternoon with even more devastating evidence. I remembered something, she said, pulling out a shoebox full of photographs. I take pictures of neighborhood events every year for the newsletter. Her photos showed the truth behind Victoria's insurance scams. Pictures from community barbecues clearly showing empty lots where Victoria claimed damaged amenities had been restored. Photos of her house during the period she claimed it was the vandalized community center. She's been using her own home as collateral for insurance fraud, Garrett realized. Claiming personal property as community assets, then collecting insurance money for imaginary damage. The total theft was staggering. $2.3 million in insurance fraud plus $1.44 million in management fee embezzlement equals $3.74 million stolen from insurance companies and neighbors. With federal treble damages for organized crime, Victoria was looking at a $12 million civil judgment. But the most damning evidence was what Eleanor found in Victoria's trash. Because apparently, criminal masterminds don't invest in decent shredders. Bank statements showing deposits from insurance companies going directly into personal accounts. Emails between Victoria and Richard discussing which community projects to claim next. Text messages about keeping the old biddy Eleanor quiet, with threats of special assessments. She documented her own crimes, Eleanor said with satisfaction. That woman's arrogance finally caught up with her. The pattern was clear now. Victoria's harassment campaigns weren't random acts of suburban tyranny. They were systematic elimination of potential witnesses to massive financial crimes. Every neighbor she'd driven away, was someone who might have noticed the missing amenities they'd supposedly paid to build and maintain. Garrett connected the final dots with military precision. She's been running a criminal enterprise disguised as HOA management. RICO statute applies to organized crime families, but it also applies to corrupt organizations systematically defrauding victims. That night, I had everything needed to destroy Victoria Ashworth completely. Federal crimes worth millions, documented evidence, multiple witnesses, and a clear pattern of ongoing criminal conspiracy. Tomorrow, the planning phase would begin. Grandpa's old workshop became our war room, and let me tell you, it felt appropriate. The smell of motor oil and sawdust mixed with the aroma of Eleanor's coffee as we spread evidence across workbenches that had seen decades of honest labor. Now they were hosting the planning session that would bring down the most corrupt HOA president in county history. Our team looked like something out of a mismatched buddy cop movie. Me in coveralls, Garrett in his army t-shirt, Eleanor clutching her evidence folders like sacred texts, and our attorney Jim Morrison, yes, like the rock star. And yes, he'd heard every joke. "All right," Morrison said, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed Eleanor's documentation. "We're looking at a RICO case with multiple federal violations: wire fraud, mail fraud, insurance fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy." Garrett had already mapped out the financial network on his laptop, connecting shell companies and bank accounts like a military intelligence briefing. "The beauty of RICO is treble damages," he explained, drawing on his research. "If we prove organized criminal activity, we can recover 3 times the actual damages." Morrison nodded. "With $3.74 million in documented theft, we're looking at potential recovery of over $12 million, plus attorney fees, plus asset forfeiture." The legal strategy was elegant in its simplicity. File a civil RICO lawsuit while coordinating with FBI investigation for criminal charges. Morrison worked on contingency, meaning we didn't pay unless we won, a lesson he'd learned from years of taking on powerful opponents who expected victims to back down due to legal costs. Eleanor had become our secret weapon. While Victoria assumed she was just another frightened elderly resident, Eleanor had been documenting everything with the methodical precision of a former accounting clerk. Bank statements, meeting minutes, photographs, correspondence. 40 years of corporate experience applied to neighborhood corruption. "The key is witness protection," Garrett said, his military background showing. "Victoria's already proven she'll retaliate against anyone who challenges her. That's where our veteran network came in. Dave Martinez had friends in private security, all ex-military guys who understood protecting people from bullies. Within 2 days, we had discreet surveillance on Eleanor's house and safe houses arranged for other witnesses. My journalist contact from the local newspaper was practically salivating over the story. "Disabled veteran harassed by corrupt HOA president. This is front-page material," she said. "But we need to coordinate timing with law enforcement to avoid interfering with the investigation." The media strategy was crucial for witness protection. Public attention would make it harder for Victoria to intimidate victims, while exposing the scope of her crimes would encourage other victims to come forward. Morrison explained the forensic accounting process like he was teaching a masterclass in financial investigation. "We'll trace every dollar stolen through shell companies and personal accounts. Digital forensics will recover deleted files from their computers. Insurance investigators will provide documentation of fraudulent claims." The FBI had been surprisingly receptive to our referral. Apparently, HOA corruption cases were becoming a federal priority after several high-profile prosecutions nationwide. Our evidence package was so comprehensive that they assigned a white-collar crime specialist within 48 hours. But the most satisfying part was watching our community heal itself. Neighbors who'd been isolated by Victoria's divide-and-conquer tactics were finally comparing notes and realizing they'd all been victims of the same manipulation. "She told me you were hostile and refused to cooperate," admitted Mrs. Patterson from down the street. "I should have known better when she wouldn't let me talk to you directly." The new HOA Oversight Committee included actual financial professionals instead of Victoria's hand-picked enablers. They'd already voted to require independent auditing and transparent budget reporting, reforms that would prevent future corruption. Garrett coordinated with veteran advocacy groups who provided legal support and media relations expertise. The story was resonating with military families nationwide, highlighting how disabled veterans face discrimination even in their own communities. "The psychological preparation is as important as the legal strategy," Garrett reminded us during one late-night planning session. "Victoria's going to fight dirty because she has everything to lose. We prepared for retaliation by documenting everything. Security cameras, recording devices, backup evidence stored in multiple locations. Every interaction with Victoria would be recorded and witnessed. The contingency plans covered every scenario from witness intimidation to evidence destruction. Morrison had injunctions ready to freeze assets and prevent Victoria from fleeing the jurisdiction. Federal prosecutors were briefed on all evidence and ready to file criminal charges immediately. Eleanor surprised everyone by becoming our fiercest advocate. "I've spent 3 years being afraid of that woman," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Now I'm going to watch her pay for every family she's hurt." The trap was set with military precision and legal thoroughness. Victoria had no idea that her months of harassment had united an entire community against her, or that every desperate move she made was adding charges to a federal indictment. Tomorrow we'd find out just how far a cornered criminal would go to save herself. Victoria's desperation reached new heights when she decided to fight back with private investigators and document destruction. Because nothing says innocent like shredding evidence at 2 a.m. in your garage. The first sign she knew the walls were closing in came when Dave Martinez spotted an unfamiliar car parked outside my shop for 3 consecutive days. White sedan, tinted windows, occupant with a camera and telephoto lens that could spot acne scars from orbit. "Damon, you've got company," Dave texted with a photo. "This guy's been photographing everyone who visits your place." Garrett's veteran security network swung into action with the efficiency of a military operation. Within hours, we had the PI's license plate, employer, and probably his coffee preferences. Turned out Victoria had hired Pinnacle Investigations, a bottom feeder outfit that specialized in insurance fraud and divorce cases. Their assignment? Find dirt on everyone supporting our case against Victoria. Because apparently, when you've stolen millions from your neighbors, the logical response is to hire more people to harass them. But Victoria's PI had no idea he was surveilling a combat veteran with friends in very low places. Garrett's buddies from his old intelligence unit took great pleasure in turning the surveillance around. By day 3, we knew more about the investigator than he knew about us. Marcus Thompson, age 45, 2 DUIs, license suspended in 3 states for illegal wiretapping, Garrett read from his laptop. This is the best Victoria could afford? The real fireworks started Thursday night when Eleanor's neighbor called about suspicious activity at the HOA office. Someone was inside with flashlights, feeding documents into what sounded like an industrial shredder. Our security cameras, strategically placed with Eleanor's permission, captured everything. Victoria's white Range Rover in the parking lot at 2:47 a.m., her husband Richard carrying boxes of documents, the two of them stuffing paperwork into a shredder like they were destroying evidence of war crimes. "Obstruction of justice is a federal felony," Morrison explained when we showed him the footage. She just added 5 years to her potential sentence. But destroying evidence wasn't enough for Victoria. Friday afternoon brought her most brazen move yet, an attempted bribery of Eleanor disguised as neighborly generosity. Eleanor called me immediately after Victoria's visit, her voice shaking with anger rather than fear. "That woman just offered me $25,000 to reconsider my position about the HOA finances." The conversation had been recorded on Eleanor's phone. She'd learned to document everything after months of Victoria's intimidation. 25 grand in cash, plus promises to pay for Eleanor's medical expenses, all contingent on Eleanor forgetting what she knew about the financial irregularities. She actually said the words, "Sometimes memory problems are a blessing," Eleanor reported. "Like I'm some senile old woman she can buy off." Victoria had just committed felony bribery of a witness in a federal investigation, on a recorded phone call, while under surveillance by the FBI. Garrett shook his head in amazement. "She's not just destroying evidence and bribing witnesses. She's documenting herself doing it." The community intimidation campaign intensified over the weekend. Victoria held an emergency HOA meeting to discuss defending the community against frivolous lawsuits. She threatened special assessments to fund legal defense against what she called malicious attacks by disgruntled residents. The meeting was a disaster for Victoria. Residents who'd been quietly supporting us finally found their voices. Questions about missing amenities, missing financial records, and missing accountability turned the gathering into an impromptu tribunal. "Where exactly are these tennis courts we've been paying to maintain?" demanded Mrs. Patterson. "Why haven't we seen budget reports in 3 years?" asked Dave Martinez. Victoria's responses grew increasingly frantic. She blamed outside agitators and disloyal neighbors for spreading lies and misinformation. Her usual fake sweet composure cracked completely, revealing the snarling authoritarian underneath. But the most damaging revelation came from an unexpected source. Richard Ashworth, apparently realizing his wife was dragging him down with her sinking ship, approached Morrison through a mutual contact about a plea bargain. "Mr. Ashworth is prepared to testify against his wife in exchange for reduced charges," Morrison informed us. "He's providing financial records Victoria thought were destroyed." Richard had kept backup copies of everything: bank statements, insurance claims, forged invoices, even emails discussing how to handle problematic residents. The man who'd helped steal millions was now gift-wrapping evidence to save his own neck. Victoria's marriage was collapsing along with her criminal empire. Neighbors reported screaming matches in the Ashworth driveway, moving trucks at their house, and Richard's frantic phone calls to attorneys. The private investigator had disappeared after learning he was under FBI surveillance. The document destruction had been photographed by federal agents. The bribery attempt was recorded evidence, and now her own husband was cooperating with prosecutors. "She's made every possible mistake," Garrett observed as we watched Victoria's Range Rover speed past our house for the 6th time that day. Obstruction, bribery, witness intimidation, and now her co-conspirator is flipping. Victoria Ashworth had gone from suburban dictator to federal defendant in record time, and she still had no idea that her biggest mistake was yet to come. Victoria's final act of desperation was so outrageously stupid that it made her previous crimes look like strategic genius. But when you're facing federal prison and your own husband is testifying against you, apparently planting evidence seems like a reasonable plan. It was 3:17 a.m. when motion sensors around our property lit up like Christmas morning. Security cameras captured a figure in dark clothing creeping around my work truck, stuffing something under the passenger seat before disappearing into the shadows. The smell of cheap cologne and expensive perfume lingered in the night air, Victoria's signature combination of desperation and delusion. 6 hours later, my phone rang with the kind of call that makes your blood pressure spike into orbit. "Mr. Reeves, this is Officer Thompson. We need you to come down to the station for questioning about vandalism at the HOA office." Victoria had called 911 at dawn, claiming she'd witnessed me destroying community property the night before. According to her statement, she'd seen me smashing windows and spray painting obscenities on the HOA building at 2 a.m. The evidence? Paint cans and a crowbar mysteriously discovered in my truck during a routine police search. Here's what Victoria didn't know. The FBI had been monitoring her communications for weeks. They knew about her 3 a.m. evidence planting expedition before I did. Agent Martinez, who'd become our federal liaison, was practically giddy with excitement. "Mr. Reeves, we're going to let this play out," he explained as I sat in the interrogation room. "Sometimes the best way to catch a criminal is to let them hang themselves with their own rope." The local police were cooperating beautifully. Officer Thompson's body camera recorded every word as Victoria provided increasingly elaborate details about my supposed vandalism spree. She described damages that didn't exist, times that could be disproven by surveillance footage, and witnessed events that happened while she was supposedly asleep. "She's making statements under oath," Thompson whispered to me during a break. "Every lie is another perjury charge." Meanwhile, our security system had captured Victoria's entire evidence planting operation in high-definition glory. Timestamps, license plates, facial recognition, everything needed to prove criminal tampering with evidence. The FBI revealed their sting operation like a magician pulling rabbits from hats. Not only had they filmed Victoria planting evidence, they'd also been monitoring her phone calls, planning the frame job with Richard. She called her husband at 2:45 a.m. to confirm the paint cans were in place, Agent Martinez explained. Then again at 6:30 to coordinate their stories about your alleged vandalism. Victoria's husband had been wearing a wire for 2 weeks as part of his plea agreement. Every conversation about framing me, every discussion about destroying evidence, every plan to intimidate witnesses, all recorded for federal prosecutors. When Victoria arrived at the police station to give her witness statement, she walked into a carefully orchestrated trap. FBI agents arrested her in the parking lot while news cameras captured every moment of her perp walk. The charges read like a criminal law textbook: conspiracy, fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, filing false police reports, and now evidence tampering and perjury. Local news went live with breaking coverage as Victoria was led away in handcuffs. The woman who'd terrorized our neighborhood for months was suddenly the one facing 20 years in federal prison. But the most satisfying moment came when Richard's cooperation revealed the full scope of Victoria's corruption. Bank records showing $4.2 million stolen through insurance fraud and embezzlement. communication records proving systematic harassment of witnesses, financial documents demonstrating money laundering through multiple shell companies. She documented everything, Agent Martinez said with professional admiration. Most criminals try to hide their tracks. Mrs. Ashworth kept detailed records of her crimes like she was running a legitimate business. The community reaction was swift and brutal. HOA members who'd been intimidated into silence for years finally found their voices. Emergency meeting called to remove Victoria from the board. Vote to dissolve all contracts with Richard's companies. Decision to cooperate fully with federal prosecution. Eleanor stood at the podium during that meeting with tears streaming down her face. For 3 years I was afraid to speak up. Today I'm proud to say we're taking our community back. The media circus was everything Victoria had tried to avoid. National news picked up the story of the corrupt HOA president who'd harassed disabled veterans while stealing millions from neighbors. Social media exploded with #JusticeForGarrett hashtags and demands for HOA accountability nationwide. Victoria's mugshot became a symbol of entitled suburban corruption. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, her designer makeup smeared, her fake smile replaced by the hollow stare of someone watching their world collapse in real time. She played herself, Garrett observed as we watched news coverage from our lake dock. Every desperate move she made just added more charges. The preliminary hearing was set for next week, asset forfeiture proceedings were already underway, and the federal prosecutor was confident about securing convictions that would put Victoria away for the rest of her productive life. All that remained was the public reckoning, the moment when justice would be served in front of the entire community Victoria had terrorized. The packed town hall looked like a cross between a courtroom and a revival meeting, with 200-plus residents crammed into folding chairs that creaked like old ship timbers every time someone shifted. The smell of strong coffee mixed with nervous sweat and anticipation as 3 news crews set up cameras in the back. Victoria entered through the side door in an orange jumpsuit that clashed spectacularly with her normally perfect color coordination. Her hands were shackled, her hair looked like she'd styled it with a blender, and the woman who'd once terrorized our neighborhood now looked like a deflated balloon animal. The federal judge presiding over the hearing had ordered this public apology session as part of her plea negotiations. Though with the mountain of evidence against her, negotiation was a generous term for complete surrender. Garrett rolled his wheelchair to the podium wearing his dress uniform, every medal earned through blood and sacrifice gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The American flag pin on his chest caught the camera lights as he adjusted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd faced real enemies. "I'm Garrett Reeves. Some of you know me as the guy Victoria Ashworth tried to destroy for the crime of fishing while disabled." The crowd was dead silent except for the occasional camera shutter clicking like mechanical applause. "I lost my legs serving this country in Afghanistan. When I came home, that lake became my therapy, my peace, my connection to the grandfather who taught me that America is worth fighting for." His voice never wavered, but I could see his hands trembling slightly. Victoria Ashworth tried to take that away from me because it didn't fit her vision of what our neighborhood should look like. Standing ovation. Every veteran in the room, every neighbor who'd been bullied, every person who'd ever faced down a petty tyrant. They rose as one, while Victoria stared at her shackled hands. Federal prosecutor Janet Williams took the podium next, armed with PowerPoint slides that would make a corporate accountant weep. $4.2 million stolen through fraudulent insurance claims and embezzlement schemes spanning 8 years, she announced as numbers flashed on the screen behind her. The crowd gasped audibly as Williams detailed the scope of Victoria's criminal empire. Fake amenities, forged invoices, money laundering through shell companies, a white-collar crime spree disguised as suburban governance. Mrs. Ashworth didn't just steal money, Williams continued. She weaponized bureaucracy to terrorize anyone who might expose her crimes. Elderly residents, disabled veterans, immigrant families, anyone who didn't fit her profitable vision of community compliance. When it came time for Victoria's court-ordered apology, her attorney practically had to drag her to the microphone. Her voice was barely audible as she mumbled something about regrettable misunderstandings and community standards. That's when Garrett delivered the mic drop moment that would go viral within hours. "Mrs. Ashworth," he said, rolling his wheelchair closer to face her directly, "your apology is accepted. But let me be clear. This was never about fishing rights or community standards. This was about a criminal who used her position to steal from families and terrorize anyone brave enough to question her authority. The silence in that room was deafening. You looked at me in my wheelchair and saw weakness. You looked at Eleanor and saw a frightened old woman. You looked at our neighbors and saw victims who wouldn't fight back. Garrett's voice grew stronger with each word. You were wrong about all of us. The crowd erupted, applause, cheers, and more than a few shouts of justice, as Victoria was led away by federal marshals. Her perp walk past 200 neighbors and 3 news crews became an instant social media sensation. Judge Henderson delivered the sentence with the gravity of someone who'd seen too many corrupt officials destroy communities for personal gain. 13 years in federal prison, $4.2 million in restitution, and complete asset forfeiture to compensate victims. Victoria's Range Rover would be auctioned for the Veterans Fund. Her house would be sold to pay back stolen money. Even her designer handbags would go on the auction block to help repair the damage she'd caused. The community celebration that followed felt like the 4th of July and Christmas rolled into one cathartic explosion of justice. Kids waved American flags as Garrett passed, neighbors hugged each other with tears of relief, and someone started playing patriotic music from their car stereo. Local news interviewed everyone who wanted to talk. Garrett became the face of veteran advocacy, Eleanor the symbol of elderly resistance, and I got to represent every person who'd ever stood up to corrupt authority. This case proves that federal law enforcement takes white-collar crime seriously, Agent Martinez told the cameras. Stealing from your neighbors and harassing disabled veterans will land you in federal prison. But the best moment came when a little girl ran up to Garrett and asked if she could learn to fish. As he smiled and nodded, I knew Grandpa would have been proud. The lake that started this whole fight would now teach another generation that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be broken. Victoria Ashworth had finally learned what happens when you mess with veterans, elderly ladies, and people who actually give a damn about their community. Justice tastes like fresh lake water on a quiet morning. 6 months later, our neighborhood looks like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. If Norman Rockwell had painted scenes of corrupt HOA presidents getting their comeuppance. The smell of Eleanor's famous apple pie drifts across community barbecues where Victoria's intimidation tactics once poisoned the air. Kids splash in our lake while their parents share stories about standing up to bullies. It's the kind of healing that makes you believe in America again. The new HOA board makes Victoria's dictatorship look like amateur hour, but in reverse. Monthly financial reports published online with the transparency of a government audit. Independent accounting that would make the FBI proud. Eleanor chairs the Oversight Committee, wielding spreadsheets like weapons of mass accountability. That recovered $4.2 million. Best plot twist ever. Instead of just pocketing the restitution, our community voted to establish the Garrett Reeves Veteran Scholarship Fund. Last month, we handed our first check to Maria Kowalski. Yeah, the daughter of the family whose chickens Victoria tried to ban. Justice has a sense of humor. Our lake transformed from a harassment target into the neighborhood's beating heart. Garrett's weekly fishing lessons teach kids patience, respect, and the ancient art of untangling lines without losing your mind. The laughter echoing across the water has permanently erased Victoria's toxic presence. Eleanor's community garden grows where the HOA office used to store fake legal documents. Growing something beautiful from something rotten, she calls it, which might be the most profound thing anyone's said about second chances. The ripple effects keep spreading like good gossip. 3 neighboring HOAs implemented transparency reforms after watching our story. State lawmakers passed Garrett's Law, requiring financial disclosure for all HOA boards. Insurance companies now train investigators using Victoria's case as a what not to miss masterclass. Garrett earned his social work degree and now helps disabled veterans fight housing discrimination from his office, a converted lakeside shed where pine needle aromatherapy beats any hospital treatment. The VA refers veterans from 3 counties to his peer counseling program. Fishing for Justice won a regional Emmy and sparked national conversations about HOA accountability. Garrett's town hall speech gets shown in high school civics classes. Teachers use it to prove that ordinary people can defeat extraordinary corruption. Victoria serves 13 years in federal prison, earning $1.15 per hour in the laundry facility. Richard got 4 years for conspiracy. Their mansion now houses the Martinez family, young military parents whose kids worship Garrett like he's a fishing superhero. Our annual Justice Day festival celebrates Victoria's conviction with veterans ceremonies, transparency workshops, and fishing tournaments. The pavilion we built with recovered funds displays a permanent memorial, in honor of communities that refuse to surrender to corruption. But here's the real victory: watching neighbors remember how to be neighbors. Eleanor evolved from frightened victim to fearless advocate. Garrett found purpose helping other veterans. Our community learned that standing together beats standing down. The Lake Conservation Program ensures clean water for future generations. Environmental scientists study our natural filtration system. Victoria's toxic retention pond became a butterfly garden where monarchs dance above the spot corruption once festered. Every sunrise, I watch Garrett wheel to the dock where this war began. Golden light paints the water while birds sing in trees Victoria wanted eliminated for aesthetic consistency. Peace settles over a community that learned its own strength. Here's what I learned. Bullies count on good people staying quiet. They weaponize bureaucracy because they assume you won't fight back. They target the vulnerable because they mistake kindness for weakness. They're wrong about all of us. If you're trapped in your own HOA nightmare, you're not alone. Document everything: phone recordings, photographs, financial records. Connect with neighbors who've been targeted. Remember that corruption thrives in darkness but dies in sunlight. Don't let them win by staying silent. Drop your HOA horror story in the comments below. Let's build an army of people who refuse to be pushed around. Share this video with anyone dealing with power-hungry board members who think rules don't apply to them. And if you want more stories about ordinary people taking down corrupt systems, smash that subscribe button for HOA Stories. We're building the largest community of HOA accountability advocates on the platform. Next week, how a kindergarten teacher's parking dispute exposed a $2 million municipal corruption scheme that reached the mayor's office. Trust me, you won't believe how deep that rabbit hole goes. Because the best revenge isn't getting even. It's making sure justice gets served with a side of community healing and a future where bullies learn that Americans don't stay down.
Thanks for watching HOA Stories. If this episode made you laugh or shake your head at HOA madness, hit that like button and drop your opinion below. We post HOA Karen Chaos and Neighborhood Showdowns every week, so be sure to subscribe to catch the next unbelievable story.